we're going to move on to Module 3, but before I get there, I want to introduce something that we're going to be talking about in Module 3. One of the things I talk about in my class that we shouldn't do when we're dealing with access is hard code numbers into a formula. So like, and I'm just going to use this formula here just because it's a very basic formula. And this is figuring out our state tax for the Module 2 project. We set our state tax as 0.04 times gross pay. So, as we know, like state taxes are done by they're set by elected officials, and you get a new Congress, or you need to get a new state Senate or something like that, or a new governor. They could change what the state tax is. I mean, maybe they could raise it from 0.04 to 0.05. And so, like looking at this formula. So like here, this is my state tax, and you'll see here's my formula, 0.04 times E5, and it's that way all the way down. Now, imagine that instead of having like 10 employees, we had 1,000 employees, and we hard-coded this number 0.04. And so if the governor comes along and he changes his taxes, he changes his tax rate to like 6, we would have to go through and edit all of these formulas. It's not that big of a deal, but there's an easier way to do this. And so what I'm going to introduce is something called an absolute cell reference. When I did this formula here, I said 0.04 times E5, and I drug down, my cell reference changed. Whoops. So this is 0.04 times E5. When I drug down, my cell references changed to E6. This cell reference changed to E7. This cell reference, it started off with E5 and it's changing as I drag, is called a variable cell reference. It's going to change as I drag. So here's an example of this. I don't know what all this stuff is. We're going to make this go away. All right, so I'm just going to generate some numbers, and I'm just going to use our autofill to do this. I just need some stuff that I can mess with. So let's just say that this is money, and we're going to say that this is our subtotal. And in this cell, we're going to put what our taxes are. So we're going to say that let's say this is sales tax. And then we're going to say that this is our total. All right. And our total is going to be equal to this cell plus this cell. All right. I don't have anything there, so naturally it's 1236. I'll go ahead and fill these in because we're going to mess with this a little bit later. All right, so now let's suppose, whoops, we're going to need one more. Let's suppose that I have this other cell down here that just says, let's say KY sales tax. And we're going to say that, let's make this a little bit bigger, and we're going to say that that is 0.06%. All right, so that's what our sales tax is in Kentucky. So to figure out our sales tax, we're going to need to multiply this times this. So we'll just go ahead and create this formula. So we'll say equals, and then we'll click our way through this, asterisk, this. And so that gives us, our formula reads D4 times J15. So this cell times this cell. And you'll see I get a number of 74 cents. But watch what happens when I do the autofill. So I'm going to grab onto this and I'm going to drag down. Everything becomes zeros. All right. So here's what's happened here. So if you ever had a problem and you're trying to figure out, why is this not working? A good way to start is just to double click on the cell that's causing you issues, and you can see what cells go into making that formula. So it's like D4 times J15, which is good. That's what we wanted. But let's click on this one that's wrong. See, this went down like we wanted it to, but look here, this also went down. If I click on just this one went down like we wanted to, but this one went down. So what's going on is, like, as I'm dragging these down, I'm also dragging these down. That's a problem, because what I want is, like, all of these cells to be multiplied by 0.06, but I don't want to have to create a new formula each and every time I do this. So what I need to do is introduce something called an absolute cell reference. So these cells in this formula, like, let's double click, this D8, D9, oops, escape, D10, see how that cell reference changes? Well, both of them right now are changing. Those are relative cell references. Relative means they change relative to how we drag. What I need to do is go back up here to this formula and change this J15. What I wanted to do is I want this to always be J15. I want D4 to become D5, D6, D7, D8. I want that one to change. But I want this other one to be an absolute cell reference. Excuse me. So I want this to always come back to J15. So I'll just get rid of this just to start all over again. And I'll show you how to do this with an absolute cell reference. So this is easy. So what I'm going to do is just do my formula the same way. Equals this asterisk this. So D4 times J15. I'm not worried about my D4. I want it to remain a relative cell reference. What I want to do is I want to change my J15 from a relative to an absolute. This is easy to do. On your keyboard, up at the very top, there's a function key that says F4. Now you may have to put, if you have a laptop, you may have to press a function key to make this work. Sometimes it works just pressing the key, sometimes it doesn't. But here's what we're going to do. You see here my insertion point, this flashy bar here, is just touching the cell reference that I want to change to an absolute cell reference. So I want to change J15 relative cell reference to J15 absolute cell reference. So with my insertion point touching it, that means it can be before the J, between the J and the 1, between the 1 and the 5, after the 5, doesn't matter. My insertion point is just touching it. I'm going to press that F4 key, and it's going to change that cell reference from J15 to $J, $15. Has nothing to do with money. What that did is it changed that cell reference from a relative cell reference to an absolute cell reference. So now the D4 is going to become D5, D6, D7, D8, D9, but the J15 will always be J15. So now I can grab hold of this cell with the formula in it and drag, and all of my numbers are going to go ahead and work. And you see, if I click on this, I have a new, my relative cell references changed. It went all the way down to D14, but my absolute cell reference remained J15. So what you got to do is just remember that the cell that you want to turn into an absolute cell reference, just make sure that your insertion point is touching it. Now you could type $J, $15 if you wanted to, but why do that? Do it the easy way. Just make sure your insertion point is touching the cell reference you want to change to an absolute cell reference, and then hit F4, and it will change. It will put those dollar signs in the cell reference for you and make that an absolute cell reference. So getting back to this, if I wanted to change this state tax to use this cell instead of typing in, whoops, gotta go back. I want to use this cell reference, 0.04, rather than typing in, that's after, sorry, I gotta go before. Rather than typing in 0.04, here's how I do this. So I'm going to go into this formula, and I'm just going to get rid of the 0.04, and now I'm going to click on the cell reference, this 0.04 over here, which changes it to N14. I'm going to hit the F4, which puts dollar signs around it. Now you notice that when I do this, it's not going to change any of my numbers, because it shouldn't. It shouldn't change my numbers. But again, imagine that this spreadsheet had 1,000 employees and not just 10. So, and we get a brand new governor, and he decides that he's going to raise the state tax by half a percent. So instead of it being 0.04, it's going to be 0.045. So now all I have to do, rather than changing all of these formulas, is just change this one cell. I can go in here and say 0.045, and when I hit enter, watch what happens to like this column, and this column. All three of these are going to change because my state tax is going to change. So I hit enter, and you'll see that all of those changed. And it's all dependent on what is in this cell. So I only have to change one cell to change my spreadsheet or my column like that. All right, so I'm going to move on to Module 3, and we'll kind of introduce what's going on here. So we have this Caitlin's Ice Cream Shop, and Caitlin, what she's trying to do is she's got a 6-month projection. So January, February, March, April, May, June. So this is what she thinks how much money she's going to make over the next 6 months. And what we're going to need to do is we're going to figure out like this. We know her revenue. In fact, that's really all we know for the most part. Cost of goods sold is just how much money it's going to cost us to pay the people who supply us with the ice cream that we're getting ready to sell. Our gross margin is how much money we have left over after we pay our suppliers. And from that money, from our gross margin, we need to deduct expenses. Or our expenses are as particular, are as a set percent. So our commission is going to be 25% of our margin. Our site rental is going to be 10% of our margin. So what we're going to end up doing is dealing with a whole lot of these things. So what I'm going to need to do is create formulas that's going to let me figure out what our expenses are all the way across for June. And so I'm going to need to use the margins for each of these months and these constants down here. But what I'm going to want to happen is I'm going to want these cells to change, but I want these to be constant. So let's just figure out our cost of goods sold first. And I have this definition about what a cost of goods sold is. But what it is like what it costs to pay our suppliers. And so what this is going to be our margin is 28.75%. So that's really how much money we have left over after we pay our suppliers. So the cost to our suppliers is actually going to be 21.25%, which is 100 minus 78.75 should be 21.25. Hopefully, if I do my math fairly correctly. So we'll figure this out, what the cost of goods sold is. In fact, I'll show you this. Let's see if I can figure this out. Now let's just do it this way. So I'm going to say we're going to figure this out for what our cost of goods sold is. So our cost of goods sold is going to be we'll start our formula equals, and it's going to be our revenue, asterisk, parentheses, 1 minus 78.75. So just looking at this formula, remember that a percentage is a decimal. So what this number is actually is 0.7875. That's what that number actually is. But when we convert it to a percentage, it becomes 78.7, because 100%. So this is 78.75%. So what would be left over would give us a 21.25. So 100, so just pretend that this 1 is actually 100%, which is the number 1, minus, this is not an algebra class, minus 78.7%. So that's going to, so what we're saying is 100 minus 78.75% is going to give us a 21.25%, and then we're going to multiply that times our revenue for that month. But I have to be careful because, like, if I just do this formula, say equal, I'll close my parentheses, and this is right. But watch what happens when I drag. I get kind of crazy numbers. Well, it's not crazy numbers, but look, these numbers and these numbers are the same. And the reason is like if I click in here, I can figure out what my formula is. C4, which is our revenue, well, that's good. times 1 minus C19. Well, in C19, there's nothing. So 1 minus C19 is 1. 1 minus nothing is 1. So 1 minus, so since there's nothing in C19, 1 minus C19 is 1. And so what we're saying is our revenue times 1, which is why we get the same number, 62.5, blah, blah, blah. But that's wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into this formula, and I can click it up here. I'm going to change my cell reference from a relative cell reference to an absolute cell reference. So I'm going to, with my insertion point touching the reference that I want to change, I'm going to hit F4 that wraps that in dollar signs. I get the same number here, but now when I drag across, I get different numbers. And the reason is, I'll double click this one, you can see my G's, or my first cell reference changed, my revenue cell reference changed. It went from B4 all the way over to G4, but my absolute cell reference, my margin, is always going to be B19. If you're in my in-class class, this will be on the practical test. All right, and I'm sure it's on the online test too. So our revenue is just our cost margin, our gross margin is just how much money we have left over after we pay these guys. So this is a simple formula. It doesn't need an absolute cell reference because I'm going to want this cell to be this minus this. I'm going to want this cell to be this minus this. This cell to be this minus this. So I want both of my cell references to change here. So equals this minus this, B4 minus B5, which gives us this. And then I can drag it over. And so now I have my margins for the 6 months. Okay, so now we're going to work on our expenses. Our expenses is how much each of these things cost. So our commission is going to be, I can look down here and our commission is going to be 25% of our gross margin. But I need this to figure this out for the gross margin here, the gross margin here, the gross margin here, the gross margin here. So these cell references will need to be relative because I'm going to need to change them. But whenever I use this cell reference, this needs to remain constant. So I'm going to skip bonus for right now because that's a whole new thing I need to talk about. But I'm just going to deal with this right now. So I'm going to say commission equals revenue times our commission cell, which is B22. And before I get off of this, I'm going to go ahead and hit F4, which is going to wrap that in dollar signs and make it an absolute cell reference. And now my commission for January is going to be $10,828.13. And you can see I can now drag this, and if I click on any of these cells, you can see that my first cell reference, the 6th row cell reference, they change. It went from B6 to C6 to D6. But you'll notice that my other one, my B22, that's an absolute cell reference, does not change because of us hitting F4 and putting those dollar signs around it. So B22, B22, B22. All of those remain the same. And we'll do the rest of these the same way. So our site rental equals gross margin, again, asterisk, and our site rental here, and then I'll hit F4, puts it in dollar signs, enter. And then I can click, and then I can drag. And then our marketing equals revenue, asterisk, whoops, asterisk, asterisk. The site rental cell, which is 10%, hit F4, puts dollar signs around it, and drag. And again, you'll see that I just want to look through these again so make sure you understand. This is B6, B23, C6, B23, D6, B23. So my first relative cell reference changed, my absolute cell reference does not. And this other formula equals revenue, asterisk, equipment repair and expense, whatever that is. And then we'll hit F4 to put dollar signs around it, and then we got that. Whoops. click on this. All right, something else I want to do. I want to go ahead and figure out total expenses. So our total expenses is going to be all of our expenses, and this is going to include bonus, even though I haven't figured out bonus yet. But I'm going to go ahead and include it in this formula because I want to show you that you don't need. You can create formulas based on cells that don't even have data in it, and you'll do this a lot when you're creating a spreadsheet, because sometimes you'll create the spreadsheet to take care of the data that's coming in. You don't have the data yet. You just need to create a spreadsheet to deal with the data as it comes in. And we can do this with everything. So, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a second. So, I'm going to go ahead and do my total expenses, even though I don't have bonus yet. So this is going to be a simple one. So I'm just going to do equals, and then I'll go up here and click on sum. And I want to make sure that my formula is correct. I'm going to include that B9 that I don't even have anything in yet, and say enter, and then I'm going to drag across. And then our operating income, and again, I can do all of this stuff even though I don't have bonus figured out. It's okay. It's all going to change when I do figure bonus out. So I'm going to say that our operating income is just how much money we have left over after we pay our ice cream people and we pay all of our expenses. So we're going to say equals our gross margin minus our total expenses. And none of these have to be an absolute cell reference, because for this one, I want it to be this minus this. For this one, I want it to be this minus this. This one, I want it to be this minus this. So this one, I want my cell references. I want both of my cell references to change. Where you need to look for like an absolute cell reference is like if you have like a row or a column of data, and you're going to perform some sort of formula using one cell. So like I have this row of my margins, and that I need to use commission for. So I've got a row here and then one cell here. That one cell is going to end up having to be my absolute cell reference. Okay, so we've got a lot of this figured out already, but I've skipped over bonus. And the reason I skipped over bonus is because it's going to be something brand new that we haven't talked about yet. So the way bonus works is that in any month that our revenue, this is our revenue, 55, 62, 67, any month that our revenue is greater than, down here you see I have a cell that says sales revenue for bonus. So any month that our revenue is greater than our sales revenue for bonus, we're going to get a bonus of $3,500. If it's less than that, we get 0. So it sounds more complicated than it really is, but let me show you how this is going to work. So I'm going to go into my bonus. This is where I want my formula to go, and I'm going to hit equal. So we'll start my formula like we normally would. And this time I'm going to go up here and I'm going to hit the down arrow, and I'm going to look for this function called if. And this is going to set up an if function. And it's pretty easy. So I'm going to click on this and it opens this box. Now we have to pay attention to this box. So what we're going to say is our logical test is revenue greater than sales revenue for bonus. The value, if true, is going to be 3,500. The value, if false, is going to be 0. So our logical test is going to say is revenue, this cell, greater than our sales revenue for bonus. Now again, I'm going to want to drag this. So I need to make this an absolute cell reference. So I hit F4, puts $signs around it. The value, if true, is going to be this, B20. And again, I'm going to drag, so I need this to also be an absolute cell reference. The value, if false, is going to be 0. Now, up here at the top, this is the way this formula works. If, so let's just say this is an if formula. If, and then our logical test, is B4 greater than the absolute value of B21? Is this greater than this? The value, if true, value if true, is going to be 3500 or B20, absolute cell reference. The value if false is going to be 0. So I click on that and I say OK. Why my OK is not working? Okay, there we go. So I got 0 there. We'll drag over. I got 0 there because again, 55 is less than 65. 6250 is less than 65. I'll drag over one more. We get a bonus because 6700 is greater than 65, and the rest of them should kind of pan out that way. So the rest of these months, and you notice that when I did this, even though, see, watch these numbers here change because I included that earlier. So I'm going to click on this and drag it across. Again, it's got the right cell reference in it, and all of those numbers change because now I have a bonus. See, some of these change, but and some of these change and some of these change because of the bonus. So that's an example of using an absolute cell reference. All right, I want to do a couple more things, and then I'm going to get out of here or move on. I want to do a couple more charts. I introduced these earlier, but I want to do them again. So let's suppose that I want to have a chart that shows, I want to do a bar chart. So I want a chart that's just going to show graphically what every month, what my operating income is for every month. So I want to have a bar that says 22,305 for January, a bar that says 25,347 for February, a bar that says 23,672 for March. So to do this, it's very easy. Except the thing is you gotta have what you need. So I'm interested in the operating income for every month. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to go up here and select my months, and then I'm going to hold the control key down because I need to select two non-adjacent ranges of cells, and I'm going to select the operating income that corresponds with those months. So here's my January, blah, 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 and here's my January through June, and then here's my operating income for each of those months. That's the hard part, is selecting. The easy part is going to go to Insert, and then I'm going to go to Charts. I'm going to do a bar chart. I'll do a 3D bar, and then there it is. Sorry, a little sneeze there. So here's my chart. So this is a graphical representation of 22,305, 25,347, those kinds of things. So you can see what we got going on here. All right. I'm going to drag this over a little bit more. I didn't do these yet. I want to do the total for these rows. And here's the easy, because you notice I'm going to skip a few rows. I got empty stuff here. I got empty stuff here. I want the total for all of these rows, all of them, all the way down. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the formula, and I'll get rid of the zeros later. So I'm going to say equals, and I'll go up here and click on sum, and then select my row, enter, and then I'll drag down. And then I can just get rid of these zeros. Delete, and delete. Oops, sorry, I go too soon. Delete. All right. So I'm going to do another chart. This time I want to do a pie chart of my expenses. I want to do a pie chart of my total expenses. So for my bonus, how much I want to show on a pie chart how much of everything, of all my expenses went to bonus. How much of all of my expenses went to commission. How much all of my expenses went to site rental. Again, this is going to be easy. I just need to select my titles, and then I'm going to hold the control key down and select the numbers that correspond to those titles. And just got to make sure that you select the right ones. Don't do like I almost did and drag down too far. And then now that I have that selected, I'm going to go up there and click on Insert again. And this time I'm going to do a pie chart. I'll do a 3D pie, and there is the chart for this. And you see, and here's what happened. The size of the pie or the size of the bar, that came from the numbers. These titles, January, February, March, April, May, all of that came from when I selected the titles of these things. So that's module 3 and introducing the concept of an absolute cell reference. So when we come back, it's access time. Yay.